Lloyd, a classmate of his, sold the Pathfinder magazine. In selling this magazine, he joined what they called the Lone Scouts and got himself a uniform of the organization. It was during the First World War and uniforms were very popular. Young William Branham certainly admired the scout suit as he had always wanted to be like a soldier. Of course, he did not have a shirt, much less a scout suit. So he asked his friend, "Lloyd, when you get that worn out, will you give it to me?" He said, "Sure, I'll give it to you, Bill." He waited and waited, but although the boy was always wearing the suit, it never seemed to wear out. Finally, he noticed that Lloyd wasn't wearing the suit anymore, so he asked him for it. By this time, his friend had forgotten that he had promised him to give him the suit, and his mother had cut it up for patches. The only thing that you could find left from the scout suit was one legging, and so young Branham asked him for that. He took it home and put it on. It made him feel proud because that was the only piece of clothing he had which bore any resemblance to that of a soldier. He thought to himself that certainly now he is a real soldier because he had on one legging. He wanted to wear it to school, but didn't know how he could do it without having the children laugh at him again. So he decided to make up the story that he had injured his leg and was using the legging as a bandage. However, when he came to school, the children wouldn't believe him. Again they made fun of him. Again he went home crying. Saturday was the most important day around the Branham household. It was the day they would hitch Kutsi, the old mule, up to the lumber wagon, and Mr. and Mrs. Branham and all the little Branhams would get into the wagon and take off for town. There they would obtain their weekly supply of groceries, and the grocery man always gave them a sack of peppermint candy for the 5 children. His father always had to be careful to divide this candy very evenly to avoid difficulties, because 10 hungry eyes would watch him very carefully. William Branham, the eldest of the sons, made a practice of not eating all his candy on Saturday, but kept some of it until the following week when he could make a bargain with some of the other children. In exchange for a couple of licks of his candy, he could get them to help him with chores around the place. William Branham's father was a bootlegger and made moonshine on the farm. One Sunday morning at the age of 10, William Branham was with his father and a neighbor down by the Ohio River. As they were walking along the banks, his father took a bottle out of his back pocket and, after taking a drink, handed it to his neighbor. The neighbor took a drink and handed it to young William Branham, who said, "No, sir, thank you, I don't drink." The neighbor answered in surprise, "A Branham and an Irishman, and you don't drink?" "No, sir," he still insisted. His father replied by saying, "I've got 4 boys and 1 sissy," the sissy being William, who had just refused to drink. This cut very deeply into his tender heart, for he was conscientious and desired to do that which was right. Here his own father had called him a sissy when he had turned down partaking of liquor, which had been such a source of grief and poverty in their own home. This was more than young Branham could take, and he said, "Hand me that bottle, and I'll show you that I'm a Branham, and that I can drink." He took the bottle and started to put it to his mouth. As he did, again the familiar sound of the wind came. He was reminded of the time when the angel first spoke to him, telling him never to smoke, drink, or defile his body in any way, for he had a work to do when he was older. He had not been thinking of this, and when he heard it, he became frightened, dropped the bottle, and started to cry. His father said, "See, I told you he was a sissy." He may have been a sissy in the eyes of the world, but God was speaking to the boy. God was preserving him for something great in the future, something through which he would not only be a help to his neighbors and the people that knew him, but a help and a blessing to millions of people around the world. This incident is the most disheartening and bitter experience of his early life. Feeling that he was not understood and suffering from an inferiority complex, he did not have many friends. He was very shy of girls and did not like them. Boys did not seem to understand him. Instead of associating with people, he would much rather take his gun and dog and go out hunting. For an example, the young people of the neighborhood had decided to have a surprise birthday party on him, but he found out about it. The early part of the evening before anyone came, he got his dog and went out coon hunting and didn't return until about 10 o'clock. He thought the party would be over by then and everybody gone home. Instead, he found out that everyone was still there playing games and apparently enjoying themselves. As he looked in the window and saw them, he decided that he didn't want to go in. He wouldn't feel at home. He wouldn't enjoy himself there with those people. So he decided to go out to the barn and sleep for the night. At the age of 14, he was out hunting and had an accident which caused him to be hospitalized for 7 months. At this time, the voice came back to him many times, but he was afraid of it as his mother had warned him of spiritualism and evil spirits. Because he was afraid of this voice, he always refused to listen and refused to respond. But God dealt with him during those months while he was in the hospital, even though all the time he rejected and refused to listen to God. The other young men would associate with the girls and apparently enjoyed themselves, but William Branham just couldn't seem to enjoy himself with any of them. Finally, when he was about 18 years old, he was persuaded to have a date with one of the girls. As they were out riding around, they stopped at a little cafe on the outskirts of town. He went in to get some Coca-Cola and sandwiches. When he came out, he found this girl smoking. This girl whom he thought was such a fine girl and one whose company he would be most apt to enjoy. To him, this was shocking. He couldn't think of anything worse for a woman to do than to puff on a cigarette. And then as he came into the car, she said, "Will you have a smoke, Billy?" He said, "No, ma'am, I don't smoke." To this she replied, "You don't smoke? You told us that you don't drink, you don't dance, and now you say you don't smoke. What do you like to do?" "Well," he said, "I enjoy hunting, I enjoy fishing, I enjoy just being out in the woods." The girl laughed and ridiculed him. Soon the other boys joined in with the girls in belittling his interests, and again he was reminded of the fact that he wasn't like other people. Finally the girl said, "Well, I don't care to keep company with a sissy." This was more than he could stand because this was just what his father had called him that day down by the river, when he had refused to take a drink of moonshine. So he said to the young people, "Nobody's going to call me a sissy. Give me that cigarette. I'll smoke it." He took the cigarette and was about to put it to his mouth when he heard that familiar sound like wind blowing through the leaves. And again the voice came to him saying, "Never drink, smoke, or defile your body in any way, for I have a work for you to do when you get older." At this he became frightened and just could not put the cigarette to his mouth. Knowing that everyone would laugh at him if he did not smoke, he broke down and cried. He went out of the car and started running down the road towards his home. They started driving after him, turning the lights on him, and laughing and making fun of him. As they continued to follow him, he left the road and started across the field toward his home. He ran as far and as long as he was able. Finally exhausted, he was forced to sit down. Here he cried his heart out and wished that he could die because he was not like other people. People did not understand him and he was not able to enjoy himself with them. As he sat there on a rock crying, he felt the presence of someone near. At first he was too afraid to turn around and look. Finally, when he did, he was not able to see anyone, although he felt sure somebody was over there in a cluster of bushes, about 50 feet from the rock. He did not understand what it was at that time. So then he was not only wishing he could die, but he was frightened as well. Again he took off across the field, crying and running as fast as he could. As a young man, he always dreamed of going out west. He always enjoyed the open country, and it was there, out in the fields with nature, that he spent his most pleasant hours. So when he was 19, he decided that he would go out west where perhaps he would be able to find work on a ranch. One September morning, he told his mother that he was going on a camping trip to Tunnel Mill, a place about 14 miles from Jeffersonville, where he had often gone. He told her this, knowing that if he had told her he's going out west, she would plead with him and persuade him not to go. He did not write to her until he was in Arizona and had a job near Phoenix. In reality, he realized that he was running away from God, but he did not want to admit it. He enjoyed the life on the ranch, but like other pleasures to him, the novelty soon wore off and he was wishing that he was back home. He had not been out west very long when he received a letter from his mother informing him that his brother Edward was very ill. He did not take it very seriously because up to this time there had been no deaths in the Branham family, and he felt that shortly he would be well again. However, a few days later, as he returned to the ranch from the city, he was given a note which read, "Bill, come out to the north pasture. It is very important." He immediately walked out to the pasture, and the first person he met was an old ranger whom they called Pop. Pop had a sad expression on his face as he informed William Branham that he had sad news for him. At that time, the foreman came up and told him that they had just received news that his brother Edward had passed away. This news came as a terrific shock to him as he began to realize that never again would he be able to see his brother alive. As he stood there, events moved before his mind. He resisted God. He knew it. Yet God was speaking to him even through the death of his brother. The first thought that came to William Branham's mind was that of whether or not his brother was ready to die. As he turned around and looked across the prairies, tears streamed from his eyes. He recalled how they had worked together as little lads, and how life had been cruel and hard to them. He remembered how they went to school with not enough food in their lunch buckets, not enough clothing on their backs, and with toes sticking out of their shoes. They had to wear old coats pinned up at their necks because they had no shirts. He remembered that one day his mother had given them popcorn in their lunch buckets, and wanting to be sure that he got his share, he had gone out and taken a handful of popcorn before the noon lunch hour. As he stood there looking toward the east, across the prairie, he again wondered, was his brother ready to die? What if it had been him that had died? Would he have been ready? And again he had to admit to himself that he was not ready, nor did he want to meet his God. The first time that William Branham recalls hearing prayer was at the time of his brother's funeral. The Reverend McKinney of Port Fulton Church was conducting the funeral service. During the service he said, "There may be some here who do not know God. If so, why not accept him now?" This struck home to William Branham, who had returned for the funeral. He realized that he did not know God. After the funeral, he did not return west, but got a job with the Public Service Company of Indiana. After working with them for 2 years, testing meters in the meters shop of the gas works in New Albany, he was overcome with gas. This was the beginning of his illness, which forced him to accept and listen to God. He visited all the doctors he could, but none gave him relief. Finally, he was taken to a specialist in Louisville, Kentucky, where he was told that his appendix would have to be removed. Being he had no symptoms of appendicitis, he couldn't understand this, but nevertheless, they said the operation was necessary for recovery. He concluded that if it was necessary for him to have an operation, maybe he was more sick than he realized. In that case, he wanted someone with him who knew God. So he called for the pastor of the First Baptist Church, who stayed there with him as he went into the operating room. Just before they started to operate, he felt that he was rapidly growing weaker. Fear entered his mind that he would never come out of this operation, but that he'd be called upon to meet his God. And he realized that he was not ready. For the first time in his life, he called upon God for help. Immediately after the operation, he experienced another vision, which was the turning point in his life. He saw himself deep in a great forest. The sound of wind and rustling leaves was coming closer and closer. He thought to himself that it was death, coming to take him away. Oh, how he cried to God because he was not ready to meet his Creator. The wind came closer and louder. Then it seemed as if he were back again in his boyhood days, standing there in the lane underneath that poplar tree where he had first heard the voice speak to him when he was 7 years old. Again the voice spoke. "Never drink, smoke, or defile your body in any way. I called you, and you would not go." The words repeated 3 times. Then Mr. Branham cried, "Lord, if that is you, let me go back to earth again, and I'll preach your gospel from the housetops and street corners. I'll tell everyone about it." The vision was over. He felt stronger and realized that death was not near, but that he would be well. The doctor had not left the hospital because he wanted to check on the progress of his patient. When he saw William Branham, he said, "I'm not a church-going man. My practice is so great I don't have time, but I know that God has visited this boy." Evidently, the doctor had felt that William Branham would not live through the operation. But not only had he lived through it, but appeared to be stronger and well on his way to recovery. Neither the doctor nor William Branham understood it. I'm confident, however, that had he known then what he knows now, he would not have been confused, but could have very easily explained it to the doctor and others concerned. After a few days, he was released from the hospital and returned home. He then started out to seek God. Up until this time, he had no religious training. He did not know how to find God, had not considered the word important. From church to church he went, trying to find some place where Christians would help him and instruct him as to how to contact God. One night at home, he became so hungry for God, he was afraid he could not live unless he found him. Not wanting to bother anyone in the house, he went out into an old woodshed back of the house, and there he tried to pray. He did not know how to pray, but he lifted his heart to God and cried out the best he could. Suddenly there appeared a light in the form of a cross, and a voice spoke to him in a language he did not understand. Then it went away. He became frightened and wondered as he said, "Lord, if this is you, please come back and talk to me again." The light re-entered the shed. As he prayed, it appeared again the third time. Now he realized that he had met God. He was happy. He was thankful. He lifted his heart to God in thanksgiving as he jumped and ran into the house as though he were running on air. His mother said, "Bo, what has happened to you?" He answered, "I do not know, but I sure feel good." Rather than stay in the house where the people were, he went outside where he could be alone with his newfound friend.